Hi, everyone. So as Amy said, I'm a fellow in modern languages, but as you've noticed, what we're talking about today is not, you might think, directly related to modern languages, which is something that's amazing about studying modern languages, is that you can also study cultural history, you can study art, you can study sculpture, which is what the direction that my research is taking me in now. So I'm going to start with a general talk about monuments. And throughout my talk, I'd like to invite you to participate and give me your thoughts. I'll be asking some questions. And as Amy said, there's absolutely no right answer because monuments are for everyone, everyone to see and everyone to connect with in some way, good or bad. That's why we build them. So I want to start with a question. What is a monument? And so you might think, well, a monument is a statue or a sculpture that was built to help us remember a certain person or historical event. It also might be a building or ruins of a building or some sort of structure that has historical importance. And it could also be other things, poems, the history or literature of a nation. This is something I'm really interested in. Are monuments just statues, or can they be other things that celebrate something about a society's identity? But I'm not going to talk about that today. But that's where literature comes in for me here. So why do we build monuments? Some would say that we build them to make permanent, to set in stone someone or something that's important in the history of a society, to immortalize, you could say. Yes, please, put in your questions or answers. I'd like to get you to think about this so that we can have a conversation later. Why do you think we build monuments? As I said earlier, they are commemorating something. So they celebrate or honor someone or something that's important in the history of a society. And maybe we build them to teach future generations about our national history and heritage, about who we are. So I'm just going to share some images here. This is Nelson's monument, Nelson's column in Trafalgar Square. So I'd like to know, do you know who Nelson is, Admiral Nelson? Does anyone know? So Nelson, Lord Nelson, as he's known, won various important naval victories for Britain in the Napoleonic Wars. He died in the Battle of Trafalgar, which is what Trafalgar Square is named after, in which Britain defeated an allied army of French and Spanish, an allied naval fleet of French and Spanish troops who wanted to take control of the English Channel so that Napoleon could invade Britain. Lord Nelson died in this battle, so he helped prevent this from happening. And so he's commemorated because of this heroism in battle. And his place at the top of a very tall column, as I'm showing Trafalgar Square here, is supposed to tell Britain in 1843, which is when it was built, and all of us now, how heroic he was and how important, how towering he is in British history. Okay, so here is another example. Let's see. This is a monument you can see along the walls of this corridor here. This is a war memorial here at Magdalen College to commemorate those that died in the First and Second World War. And on the right side, you can also see a small monument in honor of those who died in the First World War. So these are monuments, probably the most common monuments that we see across Britain are monuments to either of the world wars. So this, sort of makes sense, right? Why we've commemorated these two individuals. But I want to raise some questions that maybe you haven't thought of in terms of why we build monuments. So who decides what should be made into a monument? Who decides that monument should be built? And in other words, who decides what's important in our history? The art critic Paul Farber writes that monuments contain a desire to stop time and hold on to power. When we look at a monument, do we see this desire to claim and hold on to power? By setting a person or a historical event in stone, monuments also show a desire to stop change, to preserve something and pass it down from generation to generation. So what values are being transmitted to us when we look at a monument? And who are monuments for? Are they just are they for all of us? Are they the people that look at them when they walk by? Or are they for the people who build them? Are they for all of us in society, or just for the people who agree with the version of history that monuments show? And along these lines, what version of our history and our heritage do they show us? Because monuments teach us to remember, but they teach us to remember only certain things in a certain light and for a certain reason. Maybe they even show us a history that isn't fully real. How should monuments make us feel? I think this is really interesting, and we're going to come back to this. Monument comes from the Latin monere, which means to remind, to advise, or to warn. And the last point here, do they even matter that much? One scholar writes that one thing that all monuments have in common is that they are invisible. Basically, that no one looks at them when they walk by. The influence that their makers hoped they would have is long gone, and they have no effect on us. What do you think about this? Do you think, and again, we can talk about this later, do you notice monuments when you walk by? Did you ever notice Nelson's column? Do you notice the war memorials in your local area? Have you thought about, when you walk past any historical monument, why it's there and who built it? So, I want to talk again a little bit about Nelson's monument and some of the things that might be problematic about this monument, considering what I've just said. So, Nelson's monument is built in 1843, in the 19th century, which is known as the age of nationalism in Europe. So the idea of a nation takes shape during this time, the idea that there's a community of people who share a common history, language, and culture. And the governing elites and politicians of European nations wanted to strengthen people's sense of national identity. So this is the reason that they built monuments. In fact, in the last decades of the 19th century, so many monuments were built that this is also called the age of monuments. It was the governing elites who decided that Lord Nelson was worth commemorating as an example of military heroism. So these were men in power, and only men, commemorating another powerful white man. A strong sense of national identity becomes especially important in the context of war, because the people of a country have to feel that their country is worth fighting for. From 1843 until the First World War, European nations really glorify war and compete against each other to show their military power. As a military hero, Lord Nelson is seen as a national hero because British society at the time valued war and military service. So he's famous for saying, just before the Battle of Trafalgar, England expects that every man will do his duty. Do you think that we give this same importance to war today? Or do you think that phrase takes on a different meaning today? England expects that every man will do his duty. And this is every man, notice. So we've said that monuments teach us to remember only certain things in a certain light. Lord Nelson, yes, he was a very courageous soldier, but he was also a strong supporter of slavery, and he used his seat in the House of Lords and his position of huge influence to perpetuate the trade in human beings among plantation owners in the Caribbean, some of whom were his closest friends. Considering this, is he a figure worth celebrating in British society today? So, what are some of the things that you feel when you look at this monument? As a British person, is it important to you personally? And if you could talk to Lord Nelson, or to those that put him on a pedestal, literally, what do you think you would ask him? I'd love to hear you now. If you want to unmute some questions in the chat, Amy, you can, if you have any. If not, we can move on. But what do you feel when you look at this monument? And I can again, if that's helpful.
Yeah, bro, we'll give people a minute or so just to pop some answers in the chat or to unmute and say things if they'd like. So someone has said it feels as though you should feel proud of it because he's been put onto that pedestal, but there is no personal connection or reason to.
Oh, very interesting.
Someone else says, you mentioned his associations with the slave trade. Although he was a notable war hero in his time, today he would probably be not quite as respected now because of these links. I'm not sure we can offer him the same measure of respect they did then.
Absolutely.
Very good point.
Very, very good comments. Thank you.
Someone else says, I feel like in the modern day, monuments like this are less important in terms of glorifying war and battle and remembering Lord Nelson as this great person. Instead, it's about remembering the history our country has and moving on to focus on the future.
Okay, yeah.
We've got another one that says he was a hero of his time. His views may be outdated now, but it signifies the values of his era. Interesting, thank you.
Very interesting. Thank you all. These are really great comments. And I'm not British, so I'm really interested to hear what you, how you all relate or how this statue makes you feel. So going to these war memorials, which there are across the UK, the aggressive militarism of the European Age of Nationalism, in which the Lord Nelson column was built, as many of you know, sadly led to the outbreak of the two world wars, in which millions of people, not just from Europe, but across the world, died. World War I and World War II are probably the most monumentalized historical events in Britain, and the sacrifice of those who died fighting is undoubtedly worth commemorating. These monuments are commissioned by governing bodies at all levels across Britain, so you definitely wouldn't argue that this is just people in power, at a certain level. They are important to people in every part of society, but many of them still only give us one side of the story. None of the soldiers commemorated at Magdalen are from Black or minority ethnic backgrounds. None are women. In this case, it's because there were not any Black or minority men from Magdalen who lived, and there were no women allowed to study in Magdalen at the time. Luckily, things are very, very different now. Magdalen has come a long way since this time. But millions of African, Asian, and Middle Eastern men did fight in the British Army during both world wars, and many women of all ethnicities served and were killed as a result of the wars. Do you think we see their sacrifice commemorated in other monuments across the UK? Do you know of any? Can you think of any examples I'd like to know? And then as British citizens, and I mean, maybe some of you are not, but whatever your relation is to Britain at the minute, what do you feel when you see these monuments? And do you feel that they're important to you personally?
So we've had one response that says, the only monument I can think of that commemorated the women's effort in the war is the Steel Women in Sheffield. That makes me proud more than some of the others because it's remembering a broader umbrella of history, not just the white men that died.
Brilliant.
Yeah, it's a great answer. Funny review from Nottingham. I think there's one in Chilwell. And so we've had another one that says war memorials feel much more personal, as most people will have a link to someone who died, who fought or died during one of the world wars. However, it is only remembering the white men who fought, not all the others who did their bit. It's very true. And I think it's important to acknowledge the sacrifices those who fought in the wars made, as they gave their lives for an impersonal cause, fighting for their country and executing orders given to them, and sadly losing their lives during this. However, personally, I do not know of that many minority war memorials, so perhaps there is a bit of a gap in remembrance of others.
Absolutely, there is absolutely a gap. Yes. So again, thoughts on this, we can pick them up again when it's time for the questions and answers. But I want to say, as I move to the next one, In recent times, as you probably know, but especially since George Floyd was tragically murdered last year, protesters and activists have called for many monuments to be taken down or have toppled them. So the statue of Edward Colston in Bristol, you may know, was thrown into Bristol Harbor, and here's the pedestal without the statue. Colston made his fortune in the slave trade. And Nelson, some say, should fall. This is a fictional illustration. It is clear from these acts that people feel that monuments have something to do with the society's ideas about race and the problem of racism historically and in the present. And this is what my research is about. What do monuments tell us about ideas about race in the historical context in which they were built? And are these ideas important for our society today? I am a Hispanist. That means that I study and teach the history and culture of the Spanish-speaking world. So I'm trying to answer this question in the context of Spain and its relationship to Latin America in the early 20th century. So I suppose you could say that when what I'm doing is talking to monuments and asking them some of the questions that I mentioned before. When I study a monument, I ask, why were you chosen to be commemorated? What does it tell me about how national identity was defined and how ideas about race circulated in society in the moment in which you were built? Who chose you? And what can you tell me about them? And what did they value most? What were they afraid of? So another scholar has said that monuments tell us much more about the people who built them than about the moment that they are commemorating or the person they're commemorating. So I'm interested in what monuments tell us about the people who built them. What power were they trying to claim or to hold on to? And what does this power have to do with systems of racial inequality? And then I ask, what are you showing me about history and what are you keeping hidden? An amazing Haitian historian, Michel Rolf-Trouillot, wrote that monuments impose a silence on many aspects of the past. So what voices remain silent through these monuments? We've talked about this with the war memorials, who rightfully commemorate people who died in the world wars. But there are voices that are silenced in commemorating these people. And what might these silences tell us about racial oppression? So I'm going to briefly talk now about my research in this area. So my research starts in 1892 when the Spanish government planned a national holiday to celebrate 400 years since Christopher Columbus, discovered America, in inverted commas, because it wasn't really a discovery for everyone, was it? Europeans may not have known that the American continent existed, but the indigenous peoples who had lived there for thousands, even millions of years, definitely knew. The interesting thing about this national holiday was that it came to be known as Columbus Day in other countries, but in Spain it came to be known as Race Day. It was intended as a celebration of the unity and diversity of Spanish-speaking cultures across the world, which included a mix of people from European, American Indigenous, African, and Middle Eastern backgrounds. As fascism grew in Spain, as it did elsewhere in Europe, the idea that Spaniards were not racist, but rather celebrated different races became one of the central ideas of Spanish fascism. And you may not know this, but Spain was a fascist dictatorship from 1939 until 1978. This idea about race and Spanish nationalism is something that I'm generally very interested in. In my research, I work a lot on this too. So as part of these 1892 celebrations, the Spanish government commissioned various sculptors and artists to build monuments that would be placed in Spain and in Spain's American colonies. We would expect these monuments to reflect this celebration of racial diversity, wouldn't we? Do you think that they did? So, first I'm going to talk about the Susillo Monument. This was designed by a well-known sculptor, Antonio Susillo, and it was going to be placed in Havana, Cuba, which was at the time a Spanish colony. So this is the original design on the left. You can see at the top there's a statue of a blindfolded woman And in front of her, there is a child that's supposed to represent the indigenous cultures of the Americas. She's holding a cross, and they're standing in a boat on a globe. However, the committee that was going to place the monument in Cuba asked that the sculptor change the design to the right version, on the version on the right, so the meaning of the monument would be complete. That was their words. So as you can see, the figure of the child, the indigenous child, is replaced with the figure of Columbus kneeling, and the woman's blindfold is gone. So, why do you think this was changed? I'd like to hear your thoughts. Why do you think they might have chosen the representation on the right? And if you don't have any thoughts, that's totally fine. I know this is a little less relevant to Britain, although Columbus's arrival in the Americas in 1492 is seen as the beginning of modernity. It changed the world. It changed the entire world, really. And this is the point that the Spanish politicians who were organizing these celebrations wanted to make. So if you have
people typing, which is good.
Great.
Okay, so we've got one person who said, if the original had been kept, it would have implied that Spain and Europe was less powerful than the indigenous people.
Interesting. Mm-hmm.
Someone else has said it shows Columbus in the powerful light that the Spanish wanted him to be remembered.
Absolutely. I want to pick up on what the previous person said about showing that if the indigenous child had been there, it would shown that Spain was less powerful. This is very interesting because if we think you are young people, so this is a child or a youth. In any case, you could say that's either, a picture of a culture that's kind of less mature, or you could say it's a picture of a culture that holds the future, that's going to grow in strength and importance, that's going to be an adult, that's going to do great things. I think that's why it made the organizers, the people who had this monument commissioned, uncomfortable. Precisely because you, the next generation, have a really important role in society. And they wanted to emphasize Spain's past role in that world, in the Hispanic world, and not the role that all of the nations that were descendants of the indigenous peoples, but also of Spain. They didn't want to emphasize the importance of all these nations in Latin America. They wanted to identify or emphasize the importance of Spain. Any more comments on this one, or should I move on to the next one?
It doesn't look like any more are coming through, so maybe the next one.
This is actually the statue where it stands now in Valladolid. So, long story short, Cuba and Spain went to war in 1898 because Cuba wanted to be independent. So Spain lost its last colonies in 1898, and this monument never made it to Havana, and instead ended up in a city in Spain called Valladolid, and has been vandalized recently as a sort of fascist monument. That's what people in Spain feel about it. That's what the youth in this city felt about it. Okay, the Explorers Monument, Palos de la Frontera. So this was another monument that was commissioned by the organizers, and this is built, or it stands in the port city where the Niña da Pinta and the Santa Maria began their voyage, those three ships, to America. It also tells a surprising story. It's known as the Explorers Monument, and it was designed by a modernist architect called Ricardo Velázquez Bosco. It may remind you of the Nelson's column. It was very popular in the 19th century to use a column as a picture of power, of the towering importance, I said earlier, of something in history. So it's a column, and it's topped by the crown of the Spanish monarchy, and then a globe with a cross on top. And this globe was engraved with the names of Columbus and Queen Isabel, who was the Queen of Spain at the time and who supported Columbus and funded him. In 2014, when it was undergoing restoration, 3 giant stone heads were unearthed underneath it, which imitate the artistic style of the American civilizations at the time of the Spanish conquest, which the Spanish conquistadores destroyed completely. So the Taino, the Inca, and the Aztec cultures. These are meant to represent and to imitate artistic style of these cultures. Local newspapers reporting on this discovery in 2014 speculated, and we don't know, that they were maybe going to be part of the original monument, but they ran out of money to include them, or that they just decided not to. So originally, the cultural heritage of millions of Latin Americans is commemorated in this monument, should have been part of it, but for some reason, this part of the monument ends up buried beneath the pillar to Columbus. What a picture of the way that European colonialism crushes other cultures, isn't it? Okay, so I know that we can have lots of time for questions, so I'm just going to show you the picture of the last monument that I work on a lot more things, but these 3 are particularly interesting. They tell a story, don't they? So this is a monument in Granada. This was a design that was submitted to the committee by a Catalan artist, Justo de Gandarias, and it was an arch 50 meters high, almost the size of the Arc de Triomphe in Paris, and it was modeled on the arch of Septimo Severo in Rome. So this gives it a very European style, but the 3 doors of the arch are designed in the style of Islamic Iberian architecture. So you may know that Muslim kingdoms ruled Spain, most of Spain, for over 700 years, and those 3 arches are in Islamic Iberian style. And above the doors, there's a whole bunch of decorative art that mixes Islamic Iberian, Christian, and American Aztec styles. So this sounds like a good design for a national holiday that celebrates racial and cultural diversity, doesn't it? Well, this design, which genuinely integrates the varied artistic heritages of the Hispanic world, was rejected on the grounds that it was too expensive, and instead the committee selected a sculpture by another artist, which is the one you see on the right. This is Queen Isabel, seated on a throne, approaching Columbus with his plans for the voyage to America. So, how does this monument make you feel, the monument on the right, and how do you think it teaches those who see it about the history of the discovery or the arrival of Europeans on the American continent? What do you think it says about that history? Just to be clear, Columbus is showing Isabel here the map of the trajectory that he hopes to take, which, as you know, he was trying to go to India and ended up in the Caribbean instead by accident.
Someone has says the original monument would have shown inclusiveness, whereas the final design indicates that the discovery was only significant for the top tier of society. Someone else has said, it makes me feel quite sad about the erasure of the former cultures within Spain, but also the Southern American cultures that could have been incorporated into a design that acknowledged and appreciated all these different races.
Exactly. It's both the heritage of Spain, the Islamic heritage of Spain, which is erased, and the diverse cultures of Latin America, absolutely. Well, again, keep your thoughts, because we'll be coming to questions right now in a minute. And this is the thing, is monuments are not just for professors to study, they're for anyone. The whole point is for anyone who walks past to have an opinion, to feel something, to feel that they make a statement about who they are. So I want to tell you, though, what I think about these monuments and the design changes. I think it tells me that the politicians who commissioned them were afraid of something. They were insecure about something. They were insecure about losing power. See, the Spanish Empire had once been the largest in the world, and it encompassed most of South and Central America and large parts of the present-day United States. But by the late 1880s, the only colonies that Spain had left were Cuba and the Philippines. So by focusing on powerful figures in Spanish history and ignoring all of the other cultures in the Hispanic world, these politicians hoped that people would still think Spain was a powerful nation, even though it was not anymore. In addition, by showing images of Spanish kings and queens, explorers, and by using symbols associated with European culture, these monuments tell me that although these politicians claim to celebrate the diverse heritage of the Hispanic world, they, and Spanish society only as a whole perhaps, value one heritage above all the others, the heritage of Europe. If our monuments show that heritage of one ethnicity, one culture, one group, and their history is more important than that of any of the others, this is a problem for achieving racial equality. So I'd like to finish there with the question I'd like to present to you, because you guys have given amazing thoughts and contributions. Do you think historical monuments matter in the process of achieving greater racial justice? So I mentioned at the beginning that the word monument comes from the Latin monere. Oh, is it saying that my video stopped working?
You're frozen, but we can still hear you.
Okay, yeah, it suddenly said that my video has stopped working with my hands up in a... Okay. Shall I screen share just, and then you won't see me if this doesn't stop, but I'm sorry.
It might just correct itself.
Well, I just wait for it to correct itself.
Yeah, if it's taking a little while, I'll let you know. You can put your screen back up.
So anyway, if monuments are supposed to remind, to advise, or to warn us, in some ways they remind us about how much our societies have changed, and you guys have pointed this out, in a lot of good ways. They also advise us to be aware of the silences that they impose on others, and they warn us that the things that we value and consider worth celebrating now will most certainly change in the future. So I think that we can learn a lot from them, and I'd like to open up a conversation now and hear your questions about monuments in general and these monuments to Columbus and to his arrival in the Americas in particular. So thanks very much for listening.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much, Elisabeth. That was really interesting. So I'll give you guys a minute now just to type all your questions in. There we go. We can see you again now. So yeah, any questions? Maybe we can start with questions about the talk and about monuments and your thoughts on it all. And then, of course, any other questions you'd like to know about Oxford or university, please go ahead. So can I ask, was this research already going sort of before last year in the Edward Colston statue?
Yeah.
So fascinating. That must have been such an interesting event for you.
Yeah. No, I was working on it since 2018. So.
Wow, fantastic. Brilliant. So I can see we've got lots of people typing. Really fantastic engagement, guys, with all the things you've been sending in. Really brilliant. Okay, so our first question is, do you think it's important to keep the monuments that show the darker side of our history, or should we replace them and move on?
Yeah, I mean, that's the question that we should be having as a society. I think on the one hand, if they warn us, and if they, as I say, they remind us of how far we've come. They remind us of things that things I think we should know about our history and not pretend that they weren't there. But I also think that some monuments are just too offensive and too problematic and should come down. So I think it depends on the case. I think you can't speak generally. I certainly don't think that all of them should come down, any monument of any historical figure. And we have to understand that the things we value now have changed. And the things that, we can't sort of expect that historical figures valued the same things that we do. But yeah, I think in cases they're just not appropriate to have up.
Brilliant, thank you. Although you said that monuments are not just academics, do they play different roles for the wider population versus to historians and academics?
Yeah, that's such a good question. Yes, I think so. Because I think historians and art critics will interpret them in a certain way. But the point is they're not just for historians and art critics. They're for everyone, and their importance should be debated by everyone.
Brilliant. Do you know of any monuments from that period that weren't changed as dramatically as the ones we talked about and kept more of their original design?
That's a great question. So I think that this is where historians' work comes in, is that we don't know unless we look into. The point is that every monument that you see, there was a process. This is really true of the monuments in the south of the United States, is a lot of times the Confederate monuments that are coming down now, there were people that had them put up actually really had an intention to make the Black population of the United States feel like they were inferior. That was the intention. And so there's conversations happening behind every monument. So to answer your question, I know that every monument has a design that's debated, a reason why people want it to be put up. Sometimes there's a lot of people that participate in that process. Sometimes it's only like, a few powerful political figures or whatever, or patrons. So I think, if you're interested in this, you can read, sometimes it takes going to archives and things, but there's absolutely a story behind every monument. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. Can I ask how you came to this research topic? Sort of what, was there a moment, or were you already on a particular path to it? I was interested, I am interested, as I said earlier, in how Spanish fascism, when we think of fascism, we think of the Holocaust, we think of racism, because some of the most horrible racial regimes and racial policies come out of Nazi Germany. And anyway, I was very interested in the fact that Spain had a fascist ideology that was really different, that actually said, like, we reject racism and we celebrate diversity. And so anyway, I just wanted to know if all these like things that politicians, fascist leaders said and wrote actually were visually, when it came down to like commemorating people or showing the population certain ideas, if they matched. And they don't. Yeah. Okay. So we've had another question. Do you think there should be a monument of Captain Tom Moore?
Yes, I think there should. Absolutely. That would be amazing.
Okay, so we've had a slightly more general question. Do you know what other types of historic courses are available at Oxford?
So that is, there's a lot of different courses. I'm actually in the modern languages faculty, but I know that at Oxford you have amazing historians. I do have a lot of links with the historical faculty, really anything, the historical faculty, the faculty of history. Anything you're interested in, from the medieval period to, witchcraft or ideas about race, the transatlantic slave trade. I mean, anything really, like, I think when you do history, you would do some core courses. And I don't know what those are, but I think then when you get to pick your area of specialization, you really can pick what you're interested in, what you're passionate about, and there are people who could guide you in that study.
Yeah, absolutely. So I finished my undergrad history last year at Oxford. So what you'll do is that in your first couple of years, you'll cover, as Elisabeth said, some core things. You get a lot of choice within that, but you need to cover medieval, early modern and modern, which I was quite apprehensive about, but it gives you a really good scope and you cover a lot of different things. You get lots of choice within that, though, of which particular, set of years you want to be looking at. And then again, within that, do you want to be looking at politics? Do you want to be looking at the economy? Do you want to be looking at women? Do you want that kind of thing? And then, as you go through the course, you specialise a lot more, and it can be really niche things when you come to write your dissertation at the end. I ended up on a course on the history of the body. I had a friend who had a on the meaning of beards throughout history. So there's loads and loads of different things you can be doing. There's really a lot of scope to be studying different things in history. So if you study a language that you haven't studied before, do you still get to study the history, or would it be more the actual language?
That's a good question. You can do a joint course of history and modern languages. And actually, you can do, Spanish, what they call AB initio, which is that you don't have any, knowledge of Spanish, and you can do that alongside history. Amy could probably tell you more. She probably has friends who did the joint course.
Yeah.
But you can absolutely do both.
Yeah, definitely. So you can cover lots of both, and as you go further with the language that you've just started up, you will also be exploring more of its history, or you can be doing your subject as well as history if you want to do a joint course. Definitely you'll be able to look at both. What's the difference between the history course and the history and ancient and modern course? It's quite a hard question. I think within actual history, you don't go just the history, not actual history, not right. You don't go any earlier than medieval history. And with the ancient history, you're looking at some really ancient cultures. So you have slightly different choice in papers, but you actually do a lot of the same stuff as well. So it's just a slightly broader spectrum that you can choose from, I believe. With history and modern languages, does the history link to the country of the language that you're learning? For example, what if you did French? Would you do more French history or a mix? Elisabeth, do you know? I can answer that if you're...
You can answer, yeah. I mean, I think you choose, right?
Yeah. So when you do it, you're going to be choosing different papers, and some people like to... You'll have to do a little bit of both. You'll be choosing some. You can choose more language-based papers, and you can choose more that are sort of looking at texts, and that inevitably has a lot of sort of context and history with it. And then when you have them as separate subjects, and you'll be studying your history separately, so you're learning from the two different departments. But then as you go through your course, at the end, for example, you can do something called a bridge essay, and that's where you'd be writing about both history and French, and you'd find a topic where you're able to be doing both subjects in one piece of work, but you'll also have lots of papers where you're solely focusing on French or solely focusing on history, and it doesn't have to have anything to do with France or French language.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, there are the professors in the modern languages faculty. Some of them do a lot of work on history like I do. And so, yeah, you can either choose between like really language or linguistics-based papers, or you can do like texts from different periods. But depending on your tutor and your paper, some of the papers that you will take do a lot of history in the language department in modern languages. So, you know, if you're interested in that, there's definitely ways to kind of focus your course on that.
Absolutely. Just while we wait for a few more questions to come through, I thought I'd mention, I don't know if our participants will know this, you might do, but what you've done today has run a little bit as a tutorial would, which is how we teach primarily in Oxford. So I thought I'd ask you, Elisabeth, to explain a little bit about the tutorial method and what it gives and what it does.
Yeah, so I think the tutorial method is really amazing because you don't just listen to your tutor talk and then sort of, you know, take notes, but you are expected to have a conversation. Your tutor is interested in listening to you and listening to how you interpreted the material. So, for example, in a literary tutorial where you would study a text, your tutor would ask you questions about the text, about, you know, what you think different things, you know, the effect they have, different stylistic features of the text, and you would be having a conversation with your other students in the tutorial and with the tutor about your essay. They would ask, you know, because you have to write essays for your tutorials, and your tutors will ask you, why did you argue this, and have you thought about this? And so it's a really amazing, it's an hour of basically having a conversation. It might sound scary. It might, you know, be scary the first couple of times, but I think it's really important as someone who's taught tutorials for me to tell you that your tutors really do want to listen to you, and that your voice matters, and that it's not just about kind of, do you have this right? Did you understand this right? But it's more about, I'm helping you learn, and I'm helping you find your voice in being able to. And from the questions that you guys have asked, I mean, you really have articulated things beautifully. In fact, I'm going to have a look at this chat and maybe take notes, and for myself to remember how you feel about these monuments, because it's just really interesting and has so much value. So
yeah, absolutely. So on a practical note, that's one of the main ways we teach at Oxford and Cambridge that differs from quite a lot of other universities. So instead of, although for some subjects there are still lectures where there's sort of one tutor at the front speaking to a large group of people for an hour, tutorials are usually 2 or 3 students sat with a tutor who meet quite regularly during the term to discuss the things they've been reading and the work they've been producing. And actually, if you come to apply here, that's also what the interview is trying to mimic as well. It's not a sort of test where we sit and ask you lots of sort of hard, job type questions. It's much more an academic conversation in the same way that a tutorial is, which you guys have absolutely, been thriving at with the responses you've been giving and the way you've been engaging with what Elisabeth's been saying. It's been really impressive. So at Oxford, is there a strong focus on literature in the languages degrees, or can you choose more modules of history, linguistics, and other culture?
Yeah, that's a really good question. There is a strong focus at Oxford in particular on literature, on texts that are considered to be really important in each of the cultures of the languages that you study. But that includes, it doesn't just include, say, Spain and France, but like what's called Francophone, so like North African literature, or African and anywhere, and Latin American. Lots of people do Latin American literature. I think that I guess I would answer that question in saying that traditionally Oxford has been very focused on the literature and on literary analysis, but there are a lot of tutors now who are interested in more historical questions. And so, as I said earlier, yes, you have a lot of freedom to do modules that were more history focused.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant, thank you. So again, you've got 5 more minutes, guys, to be submitting your questions. But I thought I'd ask, in normal times, pre-pandemic, what would sort of a day in the life of a fellow in modern languages look like?
In normal times, well, it's really wonderful because I just get to spend my whole day thinking and writing about things that I'm super interested in. I can read any book I want. I think books are incredible. I think that the fact that I get to read whatever I want and think about it critically, and then, think about something new that hasn't been written about, like these monuments, and write. The days just fly by for me. So my day looks like me sitting in front of a computer thinking really, really hard, but then also having lovely walks around Magdalen. If you have a chance to come here, it's just Addison's Walk. There's deer, and it's just beautiful. I think looking out my window here or going for walks, which walks really help me think, are a big part of my day, just taking in the beauty of the environment, which Magdalen was built for contemplation. There are spaces, when at the time the college was built, that was something that was really valued. And so there's spaces that really help you kind of think. And then it's really lovely as well as a fellow because you have lunch in the senior common room or the winter common room, and you are able to talk with colleagues, and my colleagues do all different things. So I'm not just talking with people who are interested in modern languages. I'm talking to, biologists and botanists and computer scientists, and it's just really great because college has such a rich diversity of researchers as well as students, obviously. So yeah, a day in the life is really great. Yeah.
No, lovely. That made me miss it. Yes, so unless we have any final questions, I'll just give you a minute. But we'll say a massive thank you to Elisabeth. That was so interesting. So for our participants, you'll be receiving a form afterwards, which would be really great if you could fill in. We also have a chat to student function on the Magdalen College website. So if there's questions you'd like to ask current students, we have a few modern language students on there, as well as lots of history students. I'm on there, my colleagues on there, and we can all answer questions about life in Oxford, etc. Also drop us an email if there's anything you'd like to know at any point. We also have other talks going on if you're interested in other topic areas. We have an English one coming up. We've also got some science ones, so do have a look on our website. We've had lots of thank you in the chat, so that's great.
I want to thank you all very much for being so willing to participate, for such intelligent, interesting contributions. And feel free, when you write to Amy, to ask her for my email if you want to get in touch further and ask me anything else. So thank you all.